quite a number of things about the Count. Her curiosity, aroused by both Albert's stories and the new details brought to her by Lucien, was now at its height. She therefore received her husband with a smile, which was contrary to her custom, and gave the Count a ceremonious yet gracious bow. Debray exchanged a semi-familiar greeting with the Count and an intimate one with Danglars. "Allow me to introduce the Count of Monte Cristo," said Danglars. "I will say only one thing about him, which will make him a great favorite of our old fair ladies. He has come to Paris with the intention of staying here for a year and spending 6,000,000 francs during that time, which means that we may expect a series of balls and dinners and supper parties." "You've chosen a very bad time to come," said Madame Danglars. "Paris is detestable in the summer. There are no balls, receptions, or banquets. The Italian opera is in London, and the French opera is everywhere except in Paris. Our only entertainment consists of a few wretched horse races at the Champ de Mars and Sattery. Do you like horses, Count?" "I've spent a good part of my life in the Orient, Madame, and, as you know, the Orientals appreciate only two things in this world, the nobility of horses and the beauty of women." Just then, Madame Danglars' confidential maid entered and whispered a few words into her mistress's ear. The Baroness turned pale and said, "Impossible." Then, turning to her husband, she said, "Is what my maid tells me true?" "What has she told you?" asked Danglars, visibly agitated. "She says that when my coachman went to harness my horses to my carriage, he found that they weren't in the stable. May I ask what that means?" "Listen to me," said Danglars. "Oh, I'll listen to you, because I'm very curious to hear what you're going to tell me. I'll ask these gentlemen to be our judges, and I'll begin by telling them the facts. Gentlemen, Baron Danglars has 10 horses in his stable. 2 of them are mine. They're magnificent horses, the finest in Paris. You know them, Monsieur Debray, my dappled grays. Now, just when I'm about to lend my carriage to Madame de Villefort to go to the Bois de Boulogne tomorrow, these 2 horses are nowhere to be found. Monsieur Danglars has no doubt managed to make a few thousand francs on them and sold them. Oh, what an abominable breed these speculators are!" "My dear, those horses were too spirited," said Danglars. "They were only 4 years old, and they made me terribly frightened for your sake. I'll find you other horses like them, even finer, if there are any, but they'll be calm, gentle horses, which won't inspire me with such terror." The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of profound contempt. "My God!" exclaimed Debray, "unless I'm mistaken, I see your horses harnessed to the Count's carriage." "My dappled grays!" cried Madame Danglars. She rushed over to the window. "Yes, they're mine." Danglars was dumbfounded. "Can it be possible?" said the Count, affecting astonishment. Danglars said nothing. He foresaw a disastrous scene in the very near future. Debray, who also felt the storm approaching, left on some invented pretext. Monte Cristo, who did not wish to spoil his advantage by remaining too long on this occasion, bowed to Madame Danglars and withdrew, abandoning the Baron to his wife's anger. "Very good," thought the Count as he left. "I've accomplished my aim. The Danglars' domestic peace is now in my hands, and I'm about to win the gratitude of both the Baron and the Baroness at one stroke. I would have liked to be introduced to Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, but we have ample time ahead of us, and that can wait till later." With this reflection, he climbed into his carriage and returned home. 2 hours later, Madame Danglars received a charming letter from the Count of Monte Cristo, in which he stated that, not wishing to make his entrance into Paris society by distressing a pretty woman, he would be grateful to her if she would take back her horses, which he had sent to her along with the letter. They were wearing the same harness she had seen on them that morning, except that the Count had had a diamond inserted in each of the rosettes they wore on their ears. Danglars also received a letter in which the Count asked his permission to satisfy a millionaire's whim and begged him to excuse the oriental manner in which he had sent back the horses. That evening Monte Cristo went to his country house at Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. The next morning, Ali, summoned by the gong, entered the Count's study. "Ali," said Monte Cristo, "I understand you're very skillful in throwing the lasso. Is that right?" Ali nodded and drew himself up proudly. "Very good. Could you stop an ox with a lasso?" Ali nodded. "A tiger?" Another nod. "A lion?" Ali pretended to throw a lasso and imitated a choked roar. "I understand. Have you hunted lions?" Ali nodded proudly. "But could you stop 2 runaway horses?" Ali smiled. "Very well, then listen. A short time from now a carriage will pass by drawn by 2 runaway dappled gray horses, the same ones I had yesterday. Even at the risk of being trampled, you must stop them in front of my door." Ali went out into the street and traced a line on the pavement in front of the door. Then he came back inside and pointed the line to the Count, who had been watching him. The Count tapped Ali gently on the shoulder. It was his way of thanking him. The Nubian went outside, sat down in front of the house, and began to smoke his chibouque. Suddenly, a distant but rapidly approaching rumble was heard. Then a carriage appeared. The coachman was vainly trying to stop the horses, which were running wildly at tremendous speed. Inside the carriage, a young woman and an 8-year-old boy were clinging to each other, so terror-stricken that they were unable even to utter a cry. A stone under a wheel or a low-hanging tree would have been enough to cause the carriage to be smashed. Ali suddenly set down his chibouque, drew a lasso from his pocket, threw it, caught the front legs of the left-hand horse, and let himself be dragged along for 3 or 4 steps. But at the end of those 3 or 4 steps, the horse fell, preventing the other horse from continuing its wild race. The coachman leaped down from his seat, but Ali had already seized the second horse by the nostrils in an iron grip, and, neighing in pain, it sank down beside its companion. All this was done in the time it takes for a bullet to hit its mark. It was nevertheless long enough for a man to dart out of the front of the house in front of which the accident occurred, followed by several of his servants. As soon as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, this man lifted out the lady, who was clutching a pillow with one hand and pressing her fainting son to her bosom with the other. Monte Cristo carried them both into his house and set them down on a divan. "You're safe now, madame," he said. The woman pointed to her son with a look that was more eloquent than any entreaty. The child was still unconscious. "Yes, madame, I understand," said the Count, examining the boy. "But there's no cause for alarm. He hasn't been injured in any way. He only fainted from fear." "Oh, don't tell me that just to reassure me. Look how pale he is. Oh, my son, my child, my Edouard. Speak to your mother. Please, sir, send for a doctor. I'll give my entire fortune to anyone who can bring back my son to me." Monte Cristo opened a small chest, drew out a flask containing a blood-red liquid, and allowed a single drop of it to fall between the child's lips. Although still pale, the boy opened his eyes almost immediately. On seeing this, his mother became almost delirious with joy. "Where am I?" she cried, "and to whom do I owe so much happiness after such a cruel ordeal?" "Madame," said Monte Cristo, "you're in the house of a man who considers himself lucky to have the opportunity of sparing you pain." "It was all because of my cursed curiosity," said the lady. "Everyone in Paris was speaking of Madame Danglars' magnificent horses, and I was foolish enough to want to try them." "What?" exclaimed the Count in admirably feigned surprise. "Do those horses belong to the Baroness?" "Yes. Do you know her?" "I've had the honor of meeting her, and I'm doubly glad to have saved you from the danger in which those horses placed you, because you might have attributed to me. I bought those horses from the Baron yesterday, but the Baroness seemed so grieved at having lost them that I sent them back to her the same day." "Then you must be the Count of Monte Cristo, whom Hermine spoke to me about yesterday." "Yes, I am, madame." "And I am Madame Heloise de Villefort." The Count bowed as though he had just heard a name that was completely unknown to him. "Oh, how grateful Monsieur de Villefort will be," said Heloise. "You saved his son and his wife at the same time. If it hadn't been for your courageous servant, this dear child and I would have both been killed. I do hope you'll allow me to give that man a reward worthy of his devotion." "Please don't spoil Ali for me, madame," said Monte Cristo. "Ali is my slave. In saving your life he served me, and it's his duty to serve me." "But he risked his life," said Madame de Villefort. "I won't save that life, madame. It therefore belongs to me." Madame de Villefort was silent. Perhaps she was thinking about this man who had made such a deep impression on everyone who saw him. During this moment of silence, Monte Cristo examined the child whose mother was covering him with kisses. He was small and thin, and had the pallor which usually goes with red-haired children, yet his rounded forehead was covered with a forest of rebellious black hair, which, falling down to his shoulders, framed his face, doubled the vivacity of his eyes, which were full of sly malice and childish wickedness. His first movement was to shake himself free of his mother's embrace and open the small chest from which the Count had taken flask containing the red liquid. With the air of a child who is accustomed to satisfying all his whims, he began to uncork different bottles without asking anyone's permission. "Do not touch that, my boy," said the Count sharply. "Some of those liquids are dangerous, not only to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort turned pale and pulled her son back to her. When her fear had passed, she cast a short but expressive glance at her chest. "Is this your usual residence, Count?" she asked, standing up. "No, madame. It's only a sort of pied-à-terre in the country. I live at 30 Avenue des Champs-Élysées. But I see you're completely recovered and ready to go. I'll have those same horses harnessed to my carriage, and Ali will have the honor of driving you home while your coachman remains here to repair your carriage. When he is finished, I'll have it taken directly to Madame Danglars by a team of my horses." "But I'd be afraid to go with those horses again." "Oh, you'll see, madame," said Monte Cristo. "In Ali's hands they'll be as gentle as lambs." Indeed, Ali had just approached the horses, holding a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, with which he rubbed their nostrils and wiped away the foam and sweat that covered their foreheads. Then he harnessed them to the Count's carriage and climbed up on the seat. To the great astonishment of the onlookers, who had seen the horses running as though carried along by a whirlwind, he was obliged to use the whip on them to get them started, and even then they went along at such a slow trot that it took nearly 2 hours to reach Madame de Villefort's home in Faubourg Saint-Honoré.